Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. If we could have a little order in the audience, we'll begin our meeting. Thank you. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you. Madam Clerk, I don't see any cause for regrets. It looks like everybody's here. And I wonder if we could have a mover and seconder to resolve in the committee of the whole. Councillor Duddick, Councillor Johnston, all in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. That brings us to our first consent item, which is the release of easement for Ashley Oaks Emporium. And the recommendation there is that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute a release of easement pursuant to the report number 1. Council, do any of you wish a presentation about the report you've read? Are there any members of the public here with information for council on this item? I've got my microphone on, but I don't know. We'll have to ask the folks in back if they can do anything about this. Can you hear? Is it any better yet? No? Well, we could shift. Oh wait, I can hear it getting better right there. I was going to say we could shift to parade voice. I could stand up and. All right. So, any members of the public with information for council on this item before council? Going once, going twice. Not seeing any. So, council, does one of you have a motion? Councillor Duddick. Councillor Duddick moves the consent item. All in favor? Opposed, if any. That consent item carries. The second consent item is the Heritage Update Report to be received and filed by council, and that concerns the ongoing discussions with the owners at 32 Ennisclare Drive West. Normally, I should explain to the public, this consent items are anticipated to be unremarkable. And I will just check to see if any of you have any remarks on this item for us. No? Council, I'll look to you for a motion. Councillor Giddings. Councillor Giddings moves the receipt of this item. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Now, if I could have a mover for the correction of bylaws repealed in error by bylaw 2012-037. Councillor Duddick, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Now, Council, I'll just ask you, do you need to go into camera to deal with item C1, or are you satisfied with the report before you? Councillor Elgar.
I would rather go into a closed meeting at the end of this council meeting, if that's okay.
We will slip it down the agenda and honor your request. That brings us now to our public hearing items. And the first item is the public meeting report on the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment application by Davis Minardi Home Corporation. Council, the recommendations are before you, and you have the extensive report. I just wonder if any of you need a synopsis of the report, or shall I poll the audience for comment? Let me ask if there's any members of the public here with information for council on this item. Once, twice. The applicant is here and smiling. He must be happy.
Oh, now how do I do it?
In that event, council, I will ask you for a motion. Councillor Knoll.
Worship, I'd be happy to provide you a motion, which is the recommendation contained on page 11.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor, you have the motion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is carried. And now that brings us to one of our main events, and that's the Downtown Oakville Heritage Conservation District study. And we do have a report. I think the public would benefit from hearing, we do have a presentation about the report, and I believe the public might very well benefit from hearing it. And so we will turn to Scott Hanna and Susan Schappert, and we await your information.
We're on now. Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of Town Council. I'm very pleased this evening to bring forward our report and recommendation on the Downtown Heritage Conservation District study. This slide provides a bit of an overview on what we'll be speaking about this evening. I want to give you an update on the study, looking at the background and process. Then, after my opening remarks, I'm going to turn the podium over to Susan Shepard, who's one of the town's heritage planners, and she has been intimately involved in the study, and she'll introduce the study report and findings. I wish to mention as well, we have with us this evening several representatives from the consulting team that assisted staff with this particular study from MHBC Planning, including David Cooming and Nick Bogert. And when it comes time for questions, the four of us will do a tag team. At the end of the presentation, I'll go over, after Sue has presented the overview and findings, I will then follow up with a brief discussion on the questions and comments we've received from the community and the recommendations from staff. The first slide is basically a bit of a reminder about why we're doing the study in the first place. As Council will recall, it was one of the initiatives identified as part of the Downtown Oakville Strategic Action Plan that was endorsed by Council in 2010. That particular action plan confirmed the vision for the downtown established by the Livable Oakville Plan, which is our new official plan, and it had three main objectives, one of which was to maintain the downtown as a vibrant, pedestrian-oriented, mixed-use center, to ensure a high quality of urban design, and to protect and enhance the historic importance of the downtown core. There are 12 initiatives, many of which have already started, including this particular project, around or dealing with cultural heritage, urban design and streetscape, public facilities, economics, transportation, and sustainability. Including, I might add, the redevelopment plan for the Centennial Square, which I note is on the Community Services Committee tomorrow. So the study process to date, we have held extensive public review, which has included several public meetings, the release of a background issue report last December. We've had four focus group sessions with 4 focus groups, and I'll get to that in a second. There's been publication of a newsletter to keep everybody informed of the study process. And recently, just prior to Easter, we released the draft study for public review and comment. And just back at the end of May, we did get a review and recommendation from Heritage Oakville. Now on the focus groups itself, due to the initial interest in the study, we formed 4 focus groups with various interests, including business, residential, heritage, and professional. And that was back last November. And we held focus group sessions with them in January of this year, and they were all identical. And the real purpose was to identify and discuss in a more intimate sessions the key issues and concerns. Also to educate on how the districts operate. There was a lot of misinformation and questions about how districts themselves operate. And also to communicate on the study process and make sure that everybody was aware of the opportunities for input into the process. One of the things that we promised at part of the initial focus group meetings that we would have a larger focus group meeting when the study was released, and that occurred on April the 18th. And what we did at that meeting was to review the draft study, the merits of the designation of a district plan, the boundary, and what would be included or should be included in the plan and guidelines should council decide to proceed. What we've been doing over the last several months is staff have been reviewing the feedback and preparing our report and recommendation for tonight. And Sue will go over the study itself and the findings. I'm not expecting, again, council or the public to read this particular last slide that I'll be introducing, but it has been shown at a number of the public forums and also the focus group meetings. It's really our study process to date. It started last November, again, with a kickoff meeting. The dark line at the top, or the second dark line down, is really when the background issues report was released. The area in between the two bands is all of the work that has been completed by our consulting firm, MHBC Planning. And the dark circle just above the line is where we are today. It's a key council decision point as to whether or not they will move to the next phase of the process, which would be the preparation of the plan and guidelines. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sue Shepard to talk about the actual study itself and findings. And Sue, the mouse is not working, so use the arrows.
Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. So this is the study area that we were initially dealing with. It comprises of approximately 220 properties and is essentially the downtown central business area with a little bit of an expansion south to Robinson Street and then up along Allen Street. I'm going to take you through a very brief overview of some of the research that was done and the findings, and as Scott mentioned, we also do have the consulting team here to help us answer questions if you have any specific items that you'd like more information about. Generally speaking, the study team looked at 4 main components when they were undertaking their research for the project. They looked at the historic settlement and context of the area. They looked at the built heritage character of the entire study area, so that means they were looking at the architecture and the integrity of the building stock that's currently existing. They did a streetscape and a landscape survey to look at not just the built features, but also landscape features as well, streets, roads, and pedestrian amenities. And then they also did a policy review to examine the various existing town, regional, and provincial documents pertaining to heritage preservation. So what we have on the screen right now is the evaluation criteria that's outlined by the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport. This information is present in the Ontario Heritage Toolkit, which tells municipalities how to designate heritage conservation districts. And so essentially what the ministry says is that in order to have a successful heritage conservation district, you need to meet these 4 main evaluation criteria: a concentration of heritage resources, a framework of structured elements, a sense of visual coherence and distinctiveness. And I'm going to go through them hopefully fairly briefly for you. I don't think anyone can deny that there's certainly a concentration of heritage buildings in portions of our study area, and this slide just shows several of the buildings that are located along Lakeshore Road. This map that's been included in the draft study, which I believe is attached as one of the appendices in your agenda package, shows some of these built heritage features mapped within the proposed district boundary that was originally being considered. And so the gray and black areas are properties that have been identified in one way or another as being of heritage value or potential cultural heritage value. The green color indicates properties that front onto the historic street grid layout, which we can see here. One of the criteria, again, is to have an existing framework of structured elements. And so this is the historic street grid pattern from one of our historic maps. And I think it shows quite clearly how the street grid pattern has been defined and constrained by the harbor and the 16-mile creek that wraps around it. So both of these historic frameworks, the creek, of course, and the historic grid system, are still very much in place today. And I think the only change to note is along the southern portion of George Street, where the street is actually being closed in, so it no longer allows vehicular traffic. However, it is still open for pedestrian use, and you can still maintain the viewscapes that go from Lakeshore East down George Street to the lake. So Town Square is one of the pedestrian amenities that we looked at when we were trying to examine the framework of structured elements, as well as the upper photo is a photo of the limestone wall along the upper portion, northern portion of George Street, right at the former post office building. So this map shows us some of the pedestrian amenities laid out on top of the map. So the green stretches is what we're looking for, and you can see that that main strip along Lakeshore Road, of course, refers to the sidewalks along Lakeshore Road. There's a small portion stretching south along George Street that indicates the presence of Town Square, and then there's a small bar up on the upper portion of the screen, and that's the stone wall that I just referred to. I mentioned the pedestrian amenities, including, of course, the sidewalks along Lakeshore Road. Not only, of course, are they an important pedestrian amenity, but they're also contributing to important historic viewscapes. And so I've shown you here a selection of photos from modern day to, I believe, the late 70s and then turn of the century of what Lakeshore Road looked like. And although we can definitely note changes, there is a continuous street wall presence and also a very nicely defined sidewalk area. Other notable views within the study area include the views that run south towards Lake Ontario from Lakeshore Road, and also the view to the creek that is available off of Randall Street as you just go over, before you go over the bridge. All of these things that I've just described to you combine to form a sense of visual coherence and a sense of distinctiveness as well. While some of the attributes that I've talked about do extend further than the proposed boundary, we feel that the boundary that's being proposed to you tonight is where the concentration of all four criteria is at their strongest. And so this is the proposed boundary that we're bringing to you this evening. It's been slightly revised since the original preliminary draft study that we released for public comment in April. From the feedback that we received, the boundary has been slightly modified. There used to be a little cross section running along the streetscape of Dunn Street, just around Lakeshore Road, and that's been removed as part of discussions with the public and among staff and the consultants. So the proposed boundary area includes a total of 60 properties. 24 of those properties are Part 4 individually designated properties. 12 are listed on the Oakville Heritage Register, and we've got another 11 that haven't been identified as heritage so far, but that the consulting team believes may have potential cultural heritage value as well. And we've got 13 very clearly contemporary properties in that area. So should council decide to move forward with the recommendation that's before them tonight and proceed with the creation of a Heritage District Plan and guidelines, I'm just going to very briefly take you through some of the components. It'll begin with a statement of objectives and heritage value. It'll provide design guidelines for alterations and additions. There'll probably be separate guidelines recognizing that there is a difference between residential properties in the area and commercial properties, as well as properties that have obvious heritage value and those properties that I just mentioned that are of contemporary design. There will also be guidelines for new construction and infill, as we recognize that a Heritage Conservation District does not prohibit change, it only manages it, as well as guidelines for demolition and removal of structures. We'll also include landscape conservation guidelines, guidelines for streetscape improvements in the future, and we'll also discuss some more about funding initiatives and financial incentive programs for the owners of designated properties. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Scott Hanna.
Thanks, Sue. As you can see in the report, members of council, we've received a number of questions and comments throughout the study process. Those were received at public meetings that we had, also the focus group sessions, and more recently there have been formal responses received from the BIA, the Chamber of Commerce, and David Fay on behalf of property and business interests in the core. You'll find those particular last three comments on pages 118 to 127 of your agenda this evening. In response, staff have created a detailed spreadsheet, Appendix B of your report, pages 108 to 117, listing a staff response to the concerns that have been raised. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each of those particular comments and issues, but a detailed summary and staff position on the four main issues that appear on the screen are pages 24 to 28 of the report. So after the analysis of the comments that we received, staff felt they fell into four main issue areas. One being the existing planning tools and why are they not sufficient, the benefits and drawbacks of a district, the process itself, getting into what requires a permit, what doesn't require a permit, and property values. So all of these tools obviously are important, the alternative planning tools, and they in fact form an important component of any plan review process. But what we've tried to emphasize in our report, that not all of them are particularly useful or do everything we want to do when it comes to protecting heritage interests. As an example, site plan control, there's really no control over signage or facade changes, and obviously no control over demolition. Zoning standards themselves are very helpful in defining what can and cannot go on a property from a built form perspective, heights and setbacks, but again, they do not control heritage interests. The individual property designations, those would be your Part 4 properties, which Sue mentioned. There is certainly the control of demolition on that individual property, and certainly the listed attributes are controlled through permitting, but not the general area itself. And of course, Section 27, which is your listing on the Heritage Register of non-designated properties, there is certainly limited control on demolition, a 60-day waiting period. So that brings us to the Heritage Conservation District Plan, which is more of a comprehensive approach to preservation and enhancement, working with those other tools. It provides a policy framework for not only buildings, but also the public realm, the streets themselves. It certainly has a demolition control piece for all properties within the district. And again, it will manage change in a consistent manner. And the managing change is the most important piece there, because we're not suggesting in any shape or form that the district will remain exactly as it is today. There will be change, it's just it will be managed as we go forward. The other piece that was of significant interest to in the feedback we received was the issue of property values. And what we've done is we've listed 3 relevant studies on pages 130 to 186 of your agenda, which generally conclude that property values are not negatively impacted by heritage conservation districts. Now, all of these studies have been concluded by the Heritage Resource Center at the University of Waterloo, and they are quite informative. And the piece on the how heritage districts work from 2009 obviously was of particular interest because it used the old Oakville and 1st and 2nd Street Heritage Conservation Districts as study areas. And the last one that's been used as an example and listed on the overhead and also in your package is the role of heritage conservation districts in achieving community economic goals. This was a currently unpublished study by the same center, but we were very fortunate to be able to utilize this, this particular study as part of our study process by permission. It's a particular interest because it examined commercial heritage conservation districts in older Markham, that being Markham Village and Unionville, and the effect that districts have on community improvement, change management, property values, and local businesses. And it also touches on the role of the BIA in commercial heritage conservation districts. So, Your Worship and members of Town Council, the next steps should Council decide to endorse the boundary and direct staff to move forward, as noted on the recommendation that we have in front of you, would be the preparation of the district plan and guidelines. Now, there will be additional opportunities for public input and participation in the fall. We're just beginning to think about how we would do that, but obviously we'd like to get the focus groups back together in addition to downtown business owners. So again, the recommendations that are before you this evening is that the proposed boundary within your study be endorsed, and that staff be directed to proceed to the next phase of the process, which is to create the planning guidelines based on the report and bring forward a heritage district designation bylaw upon completion. We expect that that particular bylaw, if you decide to move and support this recommendation, would be sometime later on this fall or perhaps early 2013. Your Worship, that's my presentation, and as four of us, we'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much for the informative presentation and the microphone. Council, do you have any questions? Councillor Khan.
Thank you for the presentation. You said that the boundaries aren't fixed and they might change over time. What typically happens? Do the boundaries get broader, or do they shrink, or is it situational based?
Again, through your worship, to the councillor, the boundary that we are recommending tonight, it would be a fixed boundary. In other words, we would base the plan and guidelines on the boundary. One of the things that came up at the focus groups is the desire that if we do go to a plan and guidelines, it be subject to a 5-year review to see whether or not it is in fact working. The boundary at that point in time could, of course, be subject to additional scrutiny. It could shrink, it could expand. But right now we're suggesting the boundary in your report is the one we move forward on.
My second question was that in your report you said that the designation itself per se doesn't increase property values.
It does not negatively affect property values.
Right, but the report goes on to say that it's not the designation itself, but the fact that people commit to upgrades, and that's what results in the increased property value. Do you need me to turn to that?
Well,
I just need to tell him what your question is.
Is this what you're assuming, or is this what we've seen in other areas that they've designated areas as heritage districts?
Yeah, what we're seeing in the reports that we can utilize is that there's been a concern that it would somehow negatively impact property values. In other words, property values would fall. And what we're seeing in the research that we've been presented is that's not the case.
Councillor, other questions? Councillor Gittings.
Thank you. Mr. Hanna, in the report I was excited to see the mention of possible plans for infrastructure and public works and streetscape that would enhance the downtown area. I was little less than excited when I saw when we mentioned that the conservation district can be designed in a way that does not impede economic development initiatives, and that potential drawbacks include additional time required to process heritage permits. Last year, we implemented the ability for the heritage staff to deal with minor processes or applications without coming to the Heritage Committee. Would that carry forward if this were to move forward?
Yes, absolutely. The delegated authority that we currently have that's been endorsed by council would carry forward. And along that same line of questioning, what we'd be looking at in the plan and guidelines is what would require a permit, what would not require a permit. So that will be subject to discussion when the plan and guidelines are being prepared.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Council, we have at least 3 listed delegations, and I'll poll the audience after we've heard our listed delegations. Madam Clerk, would you call the first delegation?
The first delegation is Steve Bright from the Oakville Chamber of Commerce.
Welcome, Mr. Bright. Council is looking forward to your information.
Hello and good evening. Or as the first speaker, it was perhaps my prerogative to get the first glass of water. I apologize, there's just in the basket of paper. So Mayor Burton, Mayor, members of council, thanks very much for the opportunity to talk this evening about the proposed Heritage District designation for downtown Oakville on behalf of the Oakville Chamber of Commerce. Regrettably, Wendy Ranella and John Sawyer, our chair and president respectively, are both unable to attend this evening as they have conflicting commitments, so I'm here to represent the chamber in these brief opening remarks. I'm also very pleased to say that my colleague Julia Hanna is joining me today. Julie is to share her perspectives on the issue. Julie, as many of you know, I'm sure, is one of the vice chairs of the chamber and has been a downtown entrepreneur for more than 25 years. Excuse me. As you know, the Oakville Chamber of Commerce has been the voice of business in Oakville since 1949. Our mission is to foster a healthy, engaged, and sustainable business environment and economy in Oakville. So on behalf of our 1,100 members, I'd like to take a few minutes to speak to a few key points. The Chamber has taken an active role in the heritage discussion since the very first open house, as we heard from staff last November. Our participation includes being in the focus groups, in the November open house, in the April 25th open house, plus discussions with staff, members of the Chamber, and other stakeholders over the last 7 months. Last month, we submitted a formal letter to Commissioner Clohessy as her team drafted their report, on which you're now voting, which has been mentioned, and plus the Beaver ran the Chamber Chair's editorial last week on the same matter, which some of you may have read. Throughout this time, our members continue to express some concerns about over uncertainties attached to this initiative. Similarly, we realize that throughout this time, this has been a challenging file to manage. So tonight, in the ongoing spirit of a positive dialogue that the Chamber has with Council and with staff, I want to highlight 3 main points we feel are important for you to keep in mind in voting this evening. First is the central role of small business. Small businesses are, figuratively and literally, at the center of the core. This has been the case for more than 175 years, as a passage from the town's external consultant reports nicely captures. To quote from Smith's Canadian Gazetteer from 1842, a village in the township of Trafalgar, situated on Lake Ontario, at the mouth of 16 Mile Creek, 16 miles west from Toronto. It contains 550 inhabitants. This is a place of considerable business for its size, about 150,000 bushels of wheat, beside large quantities of lumber being shipped annually from this place. Therefore, in our view, any planning initiative for the downtown core should focus squarely on the small businesses in that area. They contribute significantly to the core's unique character and vibrancy through the products and services they offer, the local charities they support, the taxes they pay, and the quality of visitors that they attract. The ongoing health and contributions of downtown core small business community simply cannot be taken for granted. My second point picks up on the uncertainty theme that I mentioned just a minute ago, in which the town report recognizes. Some Chamber members are quite concerned that their costs will rise once and if a heritage designation is in fact implemented. And if costs do indeed go up, one would reasonably ask if these same independent retailers could stay downtown when rents in the other areas of Oakville or elsewhere are more attractive. And if they go, so goes much of the heritage that the town's planning initiative is meant to preserve. That would be a substantial loss for Oakville businesses, for residents, and the municipal government itself. There are other aspects of uncertainty hovering in the air for independent retailers in the core as well. After 175 years of organic evolution that has created so much of the downtown's unique character and vibrancy, what will the onset of government involvement through a heritage designation do to that very character and vibrancy that the independent retailers themselves have not been able to do over that period? And why now, many are asking? Why now when many retailers are still struggling to find their feet in uncertain economic times? Likewise, will retailers in the downtown core face additional costs and time and money that retailers in other parts of Oakville do not face? And if that's the case, what's the incentive for a small retailer to set up shop downtown? These are among the questions we'd like to discuss should this process proceed. My last point speaks to the voices of those who have expressed their opposition to this planning initiative, yet feel that their voice has somehow been lost or diminished as the process marches forward. The fact is, 23 of 25 people who stood up to speak in the first open house in November were opposed to the designation process. Yet there's scant evidence of those voices in the 2 consultants' reports, and those voices were only barely audible in staff's presentation to the second open house in April. Of course, we have to say that the current staff report does reflect on this opposition we've heard tonight, and let me just quote very briefly from page 4 of the staff report in front of you. The majority of participants in the public meeting indicated that they were not in favor of a heritage conservation, with the reasons ranging from uncertainty about the plan and guidelines, which have not been created yet, and the potential for a negative impact on property values. Many of these voices came from small business owners who, quite rightly in our view, have vested interest in maintaining a vibrant downtown. As Wendy Ranella asked last week on behalf of our members, why wouldn't these entrepreneurs have vested interest given their huge amounts of money, investments they've made of energy, time, and money, and personal commitment into running their businesses? Some people have dismissed those concerns because of those very interests. In our view, that's neither logical nor helpful to anyone who's actually engaged in this process, as the Chamber is, among others. More importantly, many residents have also voiced concerns to the Chamber about the potential negative impacts of a heritage designation on independent retailers in the core. They're worried that such a designation could drive out the retailers who help create the very character and vibrancy that we all love and cherish. As you know, many residents live downtown precisely because they can walk or cycle to a variety of these diverse, independent small retailers at their leisure. Therefore, in our view, the support of residents for small businesses in this regard cannot be overlooked. This leads to my last point and to our request of you this evening. If council votes to proceed to the next step, we would ask that they ensure, by formal motion, for example, or some other means, that the concerns of small businesses become town planning staff's top priority in moving forward to the next decision point. In other words, the Chamber and our members will be there with you, should you vote to proceed, in helping shape the plan guidelines that a bylaw would enact, if we get that far. So thank you for your time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bright. Councillor Adams?
What difference or what wording is it that you're seeking to be added to the recommendations? Because it's my understanding that certainly our staff would be seeking the input of those who are going to be impacted by the designations and the study area.
Well, as we say, a formal motion might be one option if you want to embed it. Just having a top-down commitment that small businesses will continue to be part of the part of the discussions would be fine with us as well.
Thank you.
Any others? Councillor Demoff?
Could I ask a question of staff based on the presentation, just to confirm what the costs would be if a business did want to make alterations? That not a designated building, but a building that's in the Heritage District. I know in the report it says there's no cost for a heritage permit to alter designated heritage properties. Do we know yet what the cost would be?
Through you, Your Worship. Through you, Your Worship. Are we on? Okay. Again, there's no cost to a heritage permit. Obviously, time is money, and what we'll be doing is looking at the costs of the permit process. In other words, the time it takes to fall within the timelines that other permits that would be required for building and sign permits, etc. Obviously, if you're looking at utilizing potentially historic building materials, there is an added cost to that. We recognize that, and that's why one of the components we have to talk about in the planning guidelines, as Sue mentioned, is potentially heritage incentives, things like that. So what we're trying to do is balance any additional costs with those type of things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you, Mr. Bright, for coming tonight. I'm just trying to understand your answer to Councillor Adams, where you said small business to be part of the discussion. Is there anywhere in here where it states that they won't be a part of the discussion going forward? Like, I'm just trying to understand, like, is there something that's written in here that scares you that we will not listen to the small business?
I think what we're reflecting on is the fact that 7 months into the process, some information is still coming out. So we want to make sure that small business is part of that process going forward, as they have been from the start.
Okay, so you agree that they have been involved since the start?
They have been involved since the start, but as I said, some of their concerns weren't reflected in some early drafts. So we want to make sure, and I think we're kind of agreeing here, we just want to make sure that small businesses are part of the core part of the planning going forward on this particular piece, because they are a core part of the core.
Okay, I guess I can understand, but I'm surprised that you want it written in, because I think downtown is small business. Like, I don't think we're looking for a Walmart down there, so like, I think we really do want to work with the small businesses downtown.
And we would welcome that. We're just saying here, we're small businesses are, of course, very busy running their businesses, and so we're here on their behalf, and Julia's here just to say, we've been there since we found out from a third party about this open house. We're going to continue to be there.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bright.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, is there another hand?
Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. It's actually kind of a two-part question, and one is to you, would you be comfortable with us giving direction to staff based on the idea that they should be focusing on small business or the needs of small business that you believe have not been mentioned as they go forward?
Well, yeah, we would appreciate that, but let me also say for the record, we have worked very well with staff so far, so we're not saying, so we just, you know, we'd welcome that kind of added push, and we'd be there at the table with you for sure.
And then turning it over to staff, Mr. Mayor, if we were to provide direction, say that we'd like a separate small business focus or a section in the report that shows us where, or gives us highlights even of where small business is being attended to, would that be something doable for the next phase of the report?
Through you, Your Worship, I would have no difficulty with that. In fact, it's pretty much expressly stated on pages 28 and 29 that we intend to do so.
I mean,
I just want to double check.
there's always a question that we're faced with, which is how much of the report everyone has time to read. Mr. Bright, I understood you to say, and I made a note as you said it, that your request was that we ensure by formal motion that we give small business top concern for staff. Were you suggesting that small business have some form of veto or more influence than anyone else who's involved in this?
No, they don't have a veto.
And were you seeking more influence for yourself and your group than other parties to the process? Did you want a bigger say?
Well, one idea that has been floated is a business advisory committee to come up with the plans and guidelines. And should that go forward, we'd be part of that.
Well, I think council's going to prefer to get its planning advice from its planning staff. But you're free to form a committee like that to advise staff on it. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of a bar or a barrier to you to do that. Mm-hmm. Have you at some point, have you had an occasion where you felt like you and your group were being left out? In our report, in our presentation, seemed to me there was far more than page 4 dealt with the concerns that had been presented. I'm feeling a little confused about what you're asking for.
Well, I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is to represent people who can't be here and just to say that we've worked with the town and staff very well on their behalf and we want to continue doing that. The second point is there are some uncertainties that they have and they've been asking from the start. When we were there in November in the public open house, we asked some questions and we realized it's a difficult process, but some of this information is coming out only 6 or 7 months later. So we're saying, maybe there's more information out there. I'm not a town planner, as you know. But so we're saying we'd like to be together and share those perspectives going forward.
So you understand that this is a long process and this is just one stage? All right, well, I hope that you'll continue to participate, and I hope that if you ever have, I don't expect you'll have any difficulty, but if you have any difficulty, please speak to a member of council.
We certainly will.
Okay, thanks very much for your information. Thanks. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Francine Landry, speaking on her own behalf.
Welcome, Ms. Landry. Who's the next one?
Terry Smith.
Mr. Smith, I wonder if you could move forward to be ready for because you're up next. If you could move into the batter's box. Ms. Landry, we're all ears. We look forward to your information.
Good evening. My name is Francine Landry, and my husband and I have lived in this town, we're newbies, about 30 years now. And we've been involved with heritage for quite a long time. And I have to say, to commend council and of course, Scott Hanna and the heritage staff, because I have been involved with the different committees on this project, and it has been very open, and they are quite willing to talk about different issues. And I know that you're hearing lots of different things, but I have to say, really, in all my years that I've been going to town council meetings, this is probably the most open one I've been to. So congratulations to your staff. My thought about the Downtown Heritage District study is, it's about time. I've lived in 2 heritage districts now, and I think probably many people here already know, but that we do have 3 heritage districts in the downtown area, and they're all encircling our downtown. And of course, it's been talked about for a great deal of many years, and it's great that you're actually putting it forward now so that we can talk about it and really look at what the worth is for the downtown being designated, which I believe it has great merit. My only concern would be with your boundary areas, and I know that as you showed, I think Sue had the map up of the original town plot, and the downtown area did go from Navy to Allen Street. And there are a great many different buildings along there. I don't know exactly a number that are already designated, but I know that where you stopped near the original post office, which is the present Tommy Bahama, if I can take you on a little tour here. I'm not wearing my gown for ghost tours. I won't tell you any ghosts, but if you go from the Tommy Bahama building where it stopped, there are a number of buildings on that south side of Lakeshore that are heritage buildings. I do not know, perhaps the town heritage planner can say whether they're designated or not, but I'm surprised that they're not included. That would be, just give me a moment here, the Southside Cottage Grill. If you know that building, it's actually a building that was the Gullidge Harness Shop. There's some old pictures of it, and it has is probably mid-1800s. Fabulous old building. The Gullidge House, of course, is a designated property on Trafalgar Road. You can see it's a brick house. Next to that on the corner is the White Oak Restaurant. Probably many of you would know that. Been around for a number of years, long before I moved here. And that building was actually the Kelly Furniture Store. And the Kelly House still stands in the Heritage District at the corner of George and King Street. And so that was a very long time business. You know, the Chamber of Commerce talking about business people. These are people who lived in the neighborhood and had businesses in the area. And the houses are still standing, and so too are their businesses. And I hope to see them continue to stand. You continue along, there's the designer furniture and art building, sort of I'm not exactly sure the period of it, but if you look behind the facades, and I think that that's sort of part of what's happened here with the what you are being proposed is only buildings that actually look heritage. Many buildings are still able to be restored back to their original form, or, you know, to bring back some of that if the understanding of the people who own the buildings knew what they had. The Jonathan Quinn building, that was Justice Wright Williams, one of our founding fathers. That was a general store. And you can still see the peak back there. It doesn't quite look the same in the front, but the building is still there. We actually have the real stuff here. It's not Disneyland. It's a real building that was built in the early 1800s when this was just a village. And because of people like Justice Wright Williams and Henry Gullidge, that's why we have the town that we have today. And if you continue along that street, you will go up to next to the TD Bank, not the TD Bank itself on the south side, but the building next to it. It's a three bank of buildings, mid-century, the Arcade Building it's called. I don't have the exact history on it. And then we go to the Royal LePage Building, which is an old Victorian house. And then bookended all the way to Allen Street is another old Victorian house. So you have a number of heritage buildings that aren't even marked on the map as heritage. So that's something of a concern to me. If you go to the north side, the Pick of the Crop building, certainly to me looks like a heritage building that's had some alteration, but it was actually our dairy here in town. And Harry Berry told me all about the dairy that came, you know, that's where people got their milk for many years. And the two buildings behind that building on Dunn are also of 1800s. The facades are different, but the buildings are still there. And if you stand back far enough, you can actually see some, you know, advertising. So rather interesting that we have these heritage buildings. The medicine shop, early to mid 1800s building, next to Beccafino. The Victorian house where Corks is, the restaurant Corks, is in an old Victorian Queen Anne home. And then, of course, there's the, just missed it, the old Gregory Theatre. If any of you went to the last screening of, I'm trying to remember what it was. Great movie. Anyhow, it was, it's still there, and it's still the old theatre. The facade is still there, and as is the building. And from then on, you go to the corner where Portraits is, which is, again, an old Victorian house. You just have to stand back to see it. And this is such a treat for us to be able to have this in our town. Across the street, Timothy's, another old house, mid-1800s. You know, you're here to preserve and protect our built heritage. Well, we have it. And I really hope that you, if you do not expand your boundaries, that you actually set out to designate those buildings that need to be designated, because if you don't have designation, they will be lost at some point. And I stood before council when I was a lot younger than this, when it came to the 3rd Heritage District, and I moved to this town because I loved it, and I loved the heritage. And I marked off on a map all the buildings since I had lived in the house where I lived on Palmer Avenue in the 3rd Heritage District near George's Square that had been torn down since I lived there for just a few short years. And once the 3rd Heritage District came in, not one building was torn down in the 3rd Heritage District. That's why we have Heritage District designation, because it's for the good of all, so that we can go back and show our children to say, this is where we started from. And we have a great gem here in Oakville. Probably I would say the best town in Ontario. And we have it because councillors like you, like yourselves, have done that, and the people who came before us did that. So I hope that you too will do that as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Landry, for your information. Questions, Council? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
Is Terry Smith on the same item?
Mr. Smith, thank you for taking my advice. Council looks forward to your information.
No problem, sir. I'm Terry Smith. I am just speaking on my own behalf this evening. As most of you probably know, I was a former member of the Heritage Committee, and I, in fact, chaired the committee for some number of years. And I wanted to come forward, I will not speak for very long, I wanted to just speak in support of this whole enterprise. Some of you may or may not know, I have a new career. I sell real estate, residential real estate in Oakville now. And that has given me a perspective that is quite helpful to add to my heritage love. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is, with respect to that, is that uncertainty, I have come to realize more than I ever did previously, dealing with people buying and selling real estate, uncertainty with respect to heritage is a real problem. And the degree to which properties are in a position where people are not clear what their status is, and the Heritage Register is a subject which I think needs some consideration. But setting that aside, the downtown area has always been under sort of the possibility of being designated. And in my opinion, the biggest concern related to that is not the prospect of designation. It's the uncertainty around whether or not designation will ever occur. In my view, if you look at the heritage districts, people understand what the rules are, or even individually designated properties. People understand what the rules are, and those properties are not negatively affected in any way by the designation. In fact, I think they're positively affected. But where you have the uncertainty around whether something's going to be designated as heritage, that's where the problems occur. So I think that the town should be going forward with an aggressive designation program downtown, or it should withdraw completely and say, we are not going to designate the downtown. It's the middle ground where the problem lies, in my opinion. So I think the fact that you're moving forward is good, and I applaud it. I don't have a strong opinion or recommendation on whether you should expand the boundaries or not. I haven't studied this that closely, but I would suggest that the possibility of expanding boundaries maybe needs to be looked at more clearly, or at least the properties that Francine was talking about that are not within the boundary area, that those get designated in some way so that, again, uncertainty is removed. Because if you designate part and don't designate the other part, then you've got all this hoopla about, is that ever going to get designated, and that's where the problem lies. So that's something I wanted to express. The only other thing I'd say is that just in general terms, the reason why I think this is a good thing and not a bad thing is that heritage really is the essence of downtown Oakville. There are 3 heritage districts, residential districts around the commercial area. The commercial area is the heart of the town. I don't think many people would argue the point that Oakville would not have the reputation it does, nor would it draw the people that it does, even people who live miles and miles and hardly ever walk into the heritage area. There is a lot of cachet, there's a lot of image, there's a lot of reputation, there's a lot of civic pride, there's a lot of good things that come along with the heritage aspect of our downtown. And therefore, I think it's the right thing to do to go forward and designate. And again, if we eliminate a lot of the uncertainty, and I think this is something that needs to be expressed to people, the asset that is heritage will be combined with removal of uncertainty, and in fact, I think we end up with a win-win. One other minor point. There was a point raised earlier or there was an implication that perhaps The residential areas are not all that in support of heritage in the commercial area, and while I don't have any stats on that, I live in the heritage area, and I would tend to think that that's not the case, that people are in that area because they want to be in that area, and anything that can be done to enhance, while still growing and changing and you know, developing the downtown to be more vibrant, done in a way that protects heritage, I think is what most people are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for your information. Councillor Khan.
Your Worship, I have a question for staff, if that might be appropriate right now.
Councillor, you have the floor.
Ms. Landry raised some valid points and suggesting that the district ought to be broadened, and Mr. Smith also affirmed that that's worthy of consideration. Can we get some sort of explanation of why those properties were left out, or why we decided that this is where we're going to draw the line?
Through your worship, we did actually consider, because that was part of the public comment, there was lots of discussion about the boundary itself. What we came to the ultimate conclusion is that the boundary itself has to be defensible, and it has to meet those tests under the Ontario Heritage Act, being the concentration of heritage buildings, the framework of structured elements, visual coherence, and distinctiveness. We're not saying that within the study area that there are not other heritage resources. In fact, one of the recommendations that comes out of the study on page 105 of the agenda you have is looking at some of those other properties that have been mentioned and actually moving towards designation. So in effect, doing exactly what's been stated. But as far as being a defensible district, we came to the conclusion as a staff, we supported the recommendation that we got from our consultant that that was a defensible boundary.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Khan. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Councillor Giddings has withdrawn his question. It turns out it was similar or the same. Just to put an underline on that, the point here is that we have to pass all 4 tests, not just one, and we want a defensible district. And as I said, it's a very long report, and so we can forgive those who might not have noticed. You know, after page 100, there's a reference that will go after the other properties. Councillor Adams, were you indicating a question?
No, I was going to say if there are no other members of the public who wish to speak, and I know you still have to poll, then I'll give you a motion eventually.
Let me find out. Madam Clerk, are there any more delegations?
Not in the written delegations, but there may be some in the audience.
Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Mr. Fay, please join us at the lectern. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is David Fay. I'm here this evening on behalf of Melrose Investments, which you will know as a land development and building company headquartered in Oakville in a new office building it built a few years ago at the corner of Randall and Reynolds Streets in downtown Oakville. Melrose also owns 3 redevelopment sites in downtown Oakville, which were approved by Oakville Council to be redeveloped. It also owns a designated property at 293 Church Street in downtown Oakville, which in 2011 was the subject of a heritage reconstruction completed by Melrose with the approval of Heritage Oakville Committee and Oakville Council. Melrose has also participated in the focus groups, which Mr. Hanna mentioned, and also in the 2 public meetings held on the Downtown Oakville Heritage Conservation District study. I mention this to illustrate both the contribution that Melrose Investments has made to the heritage character of downtown Oakville and the very significant contribution it is making to the future revitalization of the downtown Oakville Business District with its 3 approved redevelopment projects. With respect to the downtown Oakville Heritage Conservation District study, there are 3 issues which Melrose wants to bring to your attention this evening. First is the question of what benefits downtown landowners and business owners will achieve from a Heritage Conservation District designation. The downtown business district seems to be functioning well with its existing mix of heritage and non-heritage buildings, a sustainable balance of entrepreneurship and municipal regulation, and an active BIA. A heritage conservation district inevitably means more prescriptive municipal heritage policies, guidelines, zoning changes, regulations, and permits. In our opinion, this is not a positive development for independent business owners who need to respond to market forces with timely changes to their business models to remain competitive. This response often includes capital investments to renovate their business premises, both inside and outside, to better meet their customers' needs. In business, the ability to adapt quickly to change is a requirement for survival, and we need only look to the example of research in motion for proof of this fundamental law of business. Second is the vision for the role of the downtown Oakville Central Business District within Oakville's ever-expanding commercial structure and that of the surrounding western GTA municipalities. For many decades, the downtown Oakville mix of independent merchants and service providers has endured and prospered, despite the daily challenge of competing with national franchise operations in convenient shopping center locations with ample free parking. The continued survival of downtown Oakville in the very competitive commercial marketplace will be largely dependent on the entrepreneurial skills of existing and future business owners for whom the burden of new municipal constraints will be counterproductive. In our opinion, Town Council would make a much greater contribution to a sustainable business environment in downtown Oakville through planning policies which encourage new residential growth in the downtown area versus this Heritage Conservation District initiative. And third is for Council to listen to the comments of the downtown business community. The staff report acknowledges that those business owners who attended the November 2011 and April 25th, 2012 public meeting were overwhelmingly negative about the Heritage Conservation District initiative. If the designation and implementation of a Heritage Conservation District turns out to be too time-consuming, costly, and frustrating for merchants and landlords to adapt their business practices to remain competitive, the inevitable decline of the downtown Oakville Business District will be a great loss, not just for business owners, but also for Oakville residents. Your Worship, that completes my presentation.
Thank you very much, David. Are there questions? Thank you very much for your information. Any other members of the public with information for council on the matter? I'll confine it to table then. Councillor Adams?
I would like to move the staff recommendation, and I'd like to add a third item, and that is that staff consult with the public, including the business community, in the creation of the district plan and guidelines. And that third item is already included in the report, and it is a reiteration of what's already there and what's already intended, I know. And the reason for adding that third item is simply to put it in writing for clarity for all those who still have that concern that they will somehow be left out of the process. I don't think that this changes anything for what our staff would be doing with or without that clause, but I think it's important to send that signal to those who have come forward today asking for that clarity.
Thank you, Councillor. Discussion? Councillor Bird.
I certainly going to support it. I don't know. I don't want to take a lot of time. I'm just sitting here thinking it's been 30 some odd years waiting for us to build what we started out to build, which was a heritage heart or center for downtown Oakville. And as it pointed out, we built the periphery by creating 3 heritage districts. And during that process, as we're seeing here tonight, every step, the process changed somewhat, and there was particular reasons why we chose at the time to start in the residential area. Even the boundaries of that time changed during the process, and people, I think we originally started off on the south side of Robinson and then ended up with 1 lot south going forward. But I just wanted to recognize also, as part of the evolutionary process, the comments of Francine Landry. She didn't mention it, but she was during the process in the 3rd district. The residents, and led by herself and a few other neighbors who actually went out and raised the money to do the study to see if they qualified to be part of the Heritage District. And the second Heritage District was sort of patterned after the success of the first Heritage District, which, quite frankly, they wanted in. And during the third heritage process, we thought we could sustain, because the rules kept changing, a much bigger area, and a lot of the residents wanted to go right over to Chartwell. So as we got into the process and people saw the advantage of it, that there was a strong demand in the community to see if we could, as you just worship just mentioned, the 4 tests that we had to meet to qualify for the designation, because as we went through the process, it was subject to appeal to the OMB. And as we went to the OMB, we had to have the planning evidence to justify why we were doing it, and the criteria were met in order to win approval. That wasn't, when we started, that wasn't the process. And I notice here, it's the same way. And the process I mentioned, we're trying to build, as I see it, the heart of Heritage Downtown Oakville. And what shape that takes, how big or how small, is going to evolve over time. And as I say, this is, a good starting point for the next question, for the next series. Some of the questions that some of the property owners have and the concerns are going to be answered, and hopefully clear up some of the uncertainty that has sort of been a cloud over this whole evolving heritage process, where the boundaries were or weren't, what the process and the guidelines are changing, that we have had the benefit or the disbenefit of that process in this community for, in my experience, about 40 years now during and through it. And clearly, this council and subsequent councils were left a legacy that few other communities had to even deal with. And I think we have, up to this point in time, have recognized that legacy we had, and this is the differentiates this community from many others. And that's the one that I think is the hallmark of Oakville. Strangely enough, this little 6-block area surrounded by 3 heritage districts, and most people, regardless of what community they live in Oakville, identify it, and it's important, and I think that this will enhance the process, and let's build a heart that we're all proud of.
Thank you, Councillor Bird. Other speakers? Councillor Elgar.
It's a question of Councillor Adams. Can you read recommendation number 3 to me again?
That staff consult with the public, including the business community, in the creation of the district plan and guidelines.
Could I ask for a friendly amendment that you would put that staff continue to consult? Because I think,
of course,
from what I've heard from everybody, they have been all along.
Oh, yes. There's, and as I said in my remarks, I don't think this changes the what or the how of what the staff are working on.
All right, so we've changed the wording. Everybody's clear on that? All right, thank you. Council, as you know, anyone can ask for a recorded vote, and I think there's a certain heritage value to this vote, and on your behalf, I'm going to ask that we have a recorded vote. So those who are in support of the motion, please rise to be recognized by the chair. Councillor Khan, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Bird, I promoted you there, Councillor DeMoff, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Johnston. And I thought it was interesting that the motion was moved by the youngest member of council, and I mean no disrespect by that. It's good to have youth on council. And the eloquent speech was given by our longest serving member of council by at least one calculation. And I think that shows you have a rival in that calculation. Some of us, those of you who laughed, you know about that. So, but I think that's a lovely bracketing of the importance of heritage to our town, and I congratulate you on this step in the process. So thank you, Council. Now, that brings us to item number 6. And Robert Thun, our senior planner, is available to you for highlights of the report you have on the Madam proposal. And I would note that I believe we have 4 registered delegations on this matter. So if you'll give your attention now to Mr. Thun, or maybe we'll take 2 minutes to let the chamber clear of those not captivated by this item. As Mr. Chappelle would have said, I believe it is, I'm glad they didn't leave by inches. Mr. Thun, we are all ears.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The site at Dundas Street and Proudfoot has been the subject of a number of development applications in the past and considerable public consultation and staff review. Public input was received at the November 14th, 2011 statutory public meeting, and also there was a local residents meeting on December 7th at St. Vladimir's where further public input was received. As a result of this public input, Your Worship, the proposal has been revised to reflect a zoning bylaw amendment and also a draft plan of vacant land condominium. The official plan amendment and draft plan of subdivision originally submitted in 2007 have now been withdrawn. The report can be found on page 187 of tonight's agenda. To reiterate, the subject land is approximately 1.22 hectares in size, is bound by Dundas Street, Proudfoot Trail, Scotch Pine Drive, and a tributary of 16 Mile Creek. Adjacent to the site is the following. To the north is Dundas Street West and lands designated employment within the new communities of Oakville, and that is contained within the North Oakville West Secondary Plan. To the east is a tributary of 16 Mile Creek and also a townhouse development. To the south are two-story detached residential dwellings, and to the west, Proudfoot Trail and four-story stacked townhouse complex. The site is designated medium-density residential and also low-density residential. Each of these designations permits the detached residential development. From a zoning perspective, the site is zoned, existing zoning is PE, which is public use education. Following the statutory public meeting last November, a meeting was held with local residents, as I had mentioned, at St. Vladimir's to further discuss the development. The plan, as you can see on the overhead, as resubmitted, reflects the input received at that residents' meeting. A courtesy notice was sent out for tonight's meeting to the people who signed into the statutory public meeting, and also for those who had signed the petition that was submitted to council on the night of that meeting. From the draft plan perspective, the proposed ultimate development consists of the following: 16 lots for detached dwellings, lots 1 to 10, lots 1 to 4 along Proudfoot Trail, and 5 to 10 interior to the site will be used as model homes in the interim to showcase homes for Mattamy future developments within the new communities of Oakville. Ultimately, access will be from Scotch Pine only. Block 17 is a private condominium road, so that will be the roadway between the lots as proposed. Blocks 18, 19, 20 are on the periphery of the site. They are open space blocks and are to be conveyed to the town through this process. Block 21 is a road widening. It's a small sliver of land along the northerly edge of this proposal. That is to be conveyed to the region of Halton. To get a better understanding of this development, I'll review the 3 phases that are being proposed for this development to occur. Phase 1 relates only to lots 1 to 4. They're shown as yellow on the overhead. They consist of 4 lots for detached dwellings fronting onto the private road. The dwellings are considered dry units, so they will not be connected to water or sanitary connections in the interim. They will ultimately, but for this phase, they will not be. The existing sales center and parking lot, or parking area shown in blue, will continue to operate. The existing services, the water, the sanitary, and the storm to the sales center from Scotch Pine will also continue to operate. Temporary access will continue from Proudfoot Trail, while access to and from Dundas Street will temporarily be closed for regional road improvements. Once again, there will be no access from Scotch Pine for Phase 1. With regards to Phase 2, this relates to lots 5 to 10, also shown in yellow. This represents 6 additional detached dwellings as model homes. The existing sales center and parking area will continue to operate as it did in Phase 1. The existing services to the sales center will be relocated under the new roadway, that is Block 17, with laterals to the final 6 units being built at the same time. Temporary access to the site will continue from Proudfoot Trail with access to Dundas Street while the sales center continues to operate. So the entrances to the site, the sales center, will continue to be as is. Again, there will be no access to Scotch Pine Drive for Phase 2. The final phase, Phase 3, is the ultimate development, and it relates to the final 6 lots. The sales center and parking area will be removed. The various blocks are to be conveyed to the region and the town. Access to Proudfoot Trail and Dundas Street West will be removed, and the connection to Scotch Pine completed. So that will be the access point for these 16 units, or 16 lots. The hammerhead at the end of the internal roadway, Block 17, will be constructed to facilitate emergency vehicle turnarounds. Servicing will be completed to these lots. These final 6 lots will be the subject to also to site plan approval. This will allow for further review of the siting and the orientation of the units and the potential mitigation for noise attenuation features. And at the end of this process, there will be the ability to register the condominium and the sale of the lots for private ownership. From the zoning perspective, the zoning bylaw amendment can be found on page 343 of tonight's agenda, with a review of each of the provisions starting on page 201. But briefly, interim permissions have been included within the bylaw for the existing sales center, the existing parking area, and the 10 model homes. Staff, due to the phased approach to this development, have introduced holding provisions both for the ultimate, that is H47 for the entire property, and also for the phased development of the site, H47A, related strictly to the 10 model homes. The abutting R13 general zoning category has been maintained for consistency with the southerly abutting development and the surrounding area. Block 18 is zoned 04, consistent with the existing creek block. Block 19, zoned 01, consistent with the zoning on the south side of Dundas Street, right along Dundas Street. A site-specific R13 zoning, special provision 865, has been introduced to reflect this proposal. Mayor Burton and members of council, the site has been the subject of a number of development applications, as I had mentioned, including considerable public consultation and staff review. The proposed development is acceptable and conforms to the use and density provisions of livable Oakville. Staff believe that the proposed form and phasing of the development is appropriately addressed within the zoning bylaw amendment, with holding provisions together with the required restrictive covenants as part of those holding provisions, development agreements as part of those holding conditions, the conditions of draft approval in Appendix A of the staff report, as well as the site plan approval for lots 11 to 16. So in conclusion, Mayor Burton and members of council, staff put forth for consideration the recommendation as outlined on page 187 of tonight's agenda and as shown above. The conditions of draft approval can be found in Appendix A to the staff report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Thun, for an outstanding presentation of a very complicated file, and I hope the public benefited from that as well. Council, do you have questions of Mr. Thun? All right, then I will look to the clerk to call our first registered delegation.
The first delegation is Mary Eken. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Oh, it's withdrawn. My apologies. The next delegation would be Christine Erbs. Okay. I have for the next delegation Malek Sherbaji. And the last delegation that I have written down is Joe Policelli. Thank you, and that's all I have on the written list.
All right, are there any other members of the public with information for council on this matter? Seeing none, I'll confine it to table. Councillor Elgar.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to move the staff recommendation, but in so doing, I'd also like to thank staff and also Gary Gagors from Mattamy Developments for listening to the residents in that area. This has been going on, I think, about 6, 7 years, and it hasn't been going well for many years, but I really think because the public came out, it really helped get things sorted out as to what the people expected, and the developer listened, and staff worked hard behind the scenes with the developer to try to please the public, and it's kind of nice when we get everybody at a kumbaya in a situation like this. So I'd like to thank everybody for getting involved in it, and hopefully we get a nice result at the end. So thank you very much, Mr. Thun.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. I'll just add my thanks to Gary and Mattamy. When I saw the report, I was heard to say, what is this, a new Mattamy? So when was the last time you got a compliment from either Alan or me, Gary? Treasure it. All right, any others with comments? In that case, I'll put the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And it is carried. Congratulations to one and all. That brings us now to agenda item number 7, which is the recommendation report for Fernbrook Homes on Lakeshore, 1215 Lakeshore. And the recommendation is that the application be refused. If you give your attention now to Kirk Bigger, he will walk you through a presentation summarizing the report, which is also quite detailed. Mr. Bigger, we're all ears.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council. The next item for consideration is a recommendation report as stated for Fernbrook Homes Lakeshore Limited. It's item number 7 in your agenda, page 221. This is a slide showing the development concept for the lands owned by Fernbrook Homes Lakeshore Limited at 1215 Lakeshore Road West. The applicant is proposing a zoning bylaw amendment, a plan of subdivision, a plan of condominium, and the purpose of these applications are to rezone the lands and subdivide the lands to permit the development of residential land uses. The effect of these applications would be to permit the development of 3 single detached dwellings fronting onto Lakeshore Road West and 42 semi-detached dwellings interior to the site on a private condominium road. This is a copy of the draft plan of subdivision that is being considered this evening, and this is a draft plan of condominium that is being considered this evening. It's all part of the application. In terms of the policy and regulatory framework for the subject lands, Livable Oakville is the plan that governs the development on this site. They are found within, these lands are found within the stable residential community and are designated low-density residential. The policies of the low-density residential designation land use designation from Part D, Section 11 are applicable. The lands are also subject to the policies of Section 11.1.8 and 11.1.9, which govern intensification within stable residential communities. A portion of the lands along the Lakeshore Road West frontage are designated special policy area and are therefore subject to the policies of Part E, Section 26.2, residential lands R1 and R01 zones. In terms of zoning, the lands are zoned R01 along Lakeshore Road West and R02 in the interior of the site, and they're subject to the regulations of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. The general provisions for these zones permit detached dwellings and some community uses. Regarding public engagement, extensive input has been received. A public information meeting was held February 8th, 2012, and a statutory public meeting was held before Council April 30th, 2012. Throughout this engagement, there's been a general acknowledgement from the public that some redevelopment on the subject lands would be possible or acceptable. However, the majority of the comments received are in opposition to this development as proposed. The key concern raised is that the development does not maintain or protect the existing character of the surrounding neighborhoods. Public comments also identified specific concerns related to density, building form, height, setbacks, and lot coverage. Issues of access, drainage, and potential flooding were also raised by members of the public. Evaluation of the proposed development includes an assessment of the physical context and character of the surrounding neighborhood, including an examination of land use, built form, density, lot configuration, and overall development pattern. Shown before you on the slide are pictures of the surrounding neighborhoods. With the exception of the secondary school to the north, these neighborhoods are characterized by residential land uses with dwellings in a detached form only. The lots are large to very large, with buildings set back from the road and separated from each other by substantial distances. These neighborhoods are typified by a spacious public right-of-way with suburban cross-section, open swales, and occasional sidewalks. The streetscape presents a balance between mature trees and landscaping, with dwellings ranging in height from 1 to 2 stories. To try and sum up the existing neighborhoods, they're stable and not mixed in terms of forms, uses, and zones. They remain much as they were developed and planned in the 1960s. Livable Oakville policies identify that intensification requires the maintenance and the protection of existing neighborhood character to ensure stability. This proposal does not exhibit the characteristics of the surrounding neighborhood, and in fact proposes to introduce a different built form, that of semi-detached dwellings, at a net density that is almost 2 to 3 times greater than the density of the existing neighborhood. The proposal also does not satisfy the intensification policies and evaluative criteria as found under sections 11.1.8 and 11.1.9 of Livable Oakville. The development introduces setbacks and building orientations that are not compatible with adjacent residences, as they do not align and are not reflective of the existing character of the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed scale, height, massing, and architectural character in the development application are not considered compatible, since the proposed implementing zoning introduces a built form that is not found in the surrounding community. The proposed built form would be more dense, taller, and more massive in scale, and create unacceptable adverse impacts related to overlook, privacy, and shadowing on adjacent existing properties. The proposed development is also seeking to introduce, as mentioned, a built form and zoning regulations that are not characteristic of the built form and zoning in the area. In addition to a proposed rezoning, a number of exceptions for further relief are being sought. These exceptions include reduction in the minimum lot area, minimum front yard setbacks, minimum side yard setback, maximum overall height, maximum lot coverage, floor area to lot area ratio, and also permissions for lofts above the second story. The zoning as proposed is not appropriate for the use of these lands, and the numerous deviations from the underlying zoning regulations would result in an unacceptable adverse impact on the surrounding area. The Livable Oakville plan discourages development on private roads, and we feel at staff that the applicant has not demonstrated that a public road has not been warranted for this development. Staff has concerns with the private road as proposed in terms of accommodating public connectivity and access for pedestrians and cyclists to the surrounding neighborhood and to the school site adjacent to the north. The Livable Oakville plan also requires that impacts to adjacent properties be minimized in relation to grading, drainage, and servicing. The grading and drainage concept proposed for this development seeks to control stormwater flows using an on-site underground storage tank. In order to accommodate this storage system, it is proposed that the grades of the site are elevated approximately 1 to 1.5 meters. When this design solution is added to the requested zoning height exceptions of 2 meters, the height of the proposed new dwellings could exceed the existing adjacent heights by up to 3.5 meters. This cumulative effect of proposed elevated grades and increased dwelling height introduces overlook and raises issues pertaining to the off-site impacts on privacy and from shadowing to the surrounding established neighborhood. In conclusion, the proposal does not represent a development that reflects the appropriate implementation of the Livable Oakville plan and is not considered to be good planning nor in the public interest. Based on the analysis presented in the report and in this presentation, staff recommends that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, the proposed draft plan of subdivision, and the draft plan of condominium application submitted
Fernbrook Homes Lakeshore Limited be refused. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Questions? Councillor Duddick?
Not so much a question as at the appropriate time I'll be pleased to give you a motion, but I just wanted to commend Mr. Bigger and the planning staff for an excellently worded report, and that you've captured beautifully the concerns of the residents in the area from a myriad of different points of view, so well done.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors? Questions? Madam Clerk, do we have registered delegations on this? Would you call the first delegation?
The first delegation is Paul Johasty. Paul Johasty? Or Johnson? I'm reading printing, but it looks like Johast.
How about anybody named Paul?
The next delegation listed for this item would be Scott Wheeler.
Mr. Wheeler? Anybody
And-
named Scott? I was trying for the second laugh. It's withdrawn.
Withdrawn.
All right.
And Ryan Wheeler would be the last one that has been listed. Withdrawn.
All right. Any other members of the public with information for council on this matter? Seeing none. Councillor Duddick, the chair recognizes you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Demoff and I are pleased to move this. And again, our thanks to staff for the report, and also thanks to members of the public who had invested considerable time and effort in regards to making their views known from the very beginning and throughout the process. It's a very important dialogue that takes place, and I commend you for being part of that process. And I would ask that we could have a recorded vote as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Then all those in support of Councillor Duddick's motion, please rise to be named by the chair. Councillor Khan, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Mayor Burton, Councillor Giddings, this time Councillor Bird, Councillor Demoff, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor Johnston. I declare the motion carried. Thank you. Now, Council, if you permit me, I will describe the rest of the agenda, the listed agenda items as two confidential items, the bonusing procedure and the Heritage Oakville Committee. It was a suggestion earlier that we do the confidential items last. Let me turn now to Mr. Bigger for his précis of the report you have before you on bonusing procedure. In any event, the recommendation is receipt. And we've lost the crowd, but that's all right. As long as council will pay attention to Mr. Bigger, all will be well. Mr. Bigger.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The next item for consideration is the bonusing procedure, and that is item number 8, page 257 in your agendas this evening. This presentation presents an overview of the bonusing matters under the Livable Oakville Plan and highlights of the town's bonusing procedure. A flow chart of the town's bonusing procedure is presented in Appendix 8 of the report. And just to provide a bit of a stage for this, set the stage, the use of this procedure will ensure that bonusing is conducted transparently and that it is applied fairly and consistency in all cases. So I'm not going to dwell on the bonusing topic too much because it's been before council previously on a couple of occasions throughout the Livable Oakville process, but just a quick review. Bonusing is a planning tool provided for through Section 37 of the Planning Act. It allows municipalities to secure public benefits in exchange for permitting additional height and density in a development through the rezoning process. Several principles we aim to incorporate in our work to help guide bonusing. The official plan must have approved enabling policies. A Section 34 zoning bylaw is needed to permit the bonus development. A Section 37 contribution, the public benefit, must fall within the scope of a Section 34 bylaw. Section 37 agreement may be registered on title, and the benefits secured through these types of agreements may not replace funding through other municipal requirements, programs, or taxation available. Some of the benefits that can be secured through bonusing to enable and establish a continuous pattern of development, to establish design standards to ensure compatibility, to promote safe, compact, walkable, and vibrant streetscapes, to direct intensification to identified locations, and to promote transit supportive goals. These principles are reflected in the town's bonusing policies and in the bonusing procedure. Bonusing, at the very heart of it, is intended to support good planning. It's not meant to be used for raising revenue, nor is it to be used for selling off development rights. Really, bonusing is not to be used as a substitute for good planning. Candidate developments for Section 37 must first conform to all the other policies and criteria of the official plan before any increases in height or density may be considered. Once it has been concluded that the candidate development conforms to the official plan, then additional height or density of the proposed development may be assessed. A determination of any potential impacts from that development and an appropriate exchange of benefits to mitigate those impacts would follow this assessment. Ultimately, the public benefit being sought should be provided in the community in the neighborhood of the candidate development site. In terms of public benefits, Oakville has identified a general list in the Livable Oakville Plan. It includes transit infrastructure, public parking, affordable housing, conservation of cultural heritage resources, protection of natural features and parkland improvements, public facilities, mixed use, green buildings, and public art. The Livable Oakville Plan contains policies to enable the use of bonusing. They identify the public benefits to be considered. They identify specific locations and amounts that may be considered as of right, such as in the Uptown Core, Kerr Village, and Bronte Village. Midtown Oakville is a little bit different. Locations for bonusing are identified, but no height limit is identified. In other locations, such as Palermo Village and downtown Oakville, bonusing may be considered, but under a higher level of scrutiny through an official plan amendment. And once again, in every case of bonus development, all the other policies of the plan still apply and must be satisfied. In North Oakville, which is a slightly different policy framework, it follows a similar approach where specific locations for bonusing may be considered. Here we are, the procedure. Squint up. I'm not going to ask you to look in detail at this. It is in Appendix A of the report, and we can certainly provide enlargements to this. It'll be posted on our website eventually. But what we're attempting to illustrate in this flow chart is an existing process. The bonusing procedure is married or mirrors the development application process. And so this essentially maps out how we would pre-consult and follow through on a review and bring matters forward for decision by council. And so bonusing follows a similar approach. It provides for, and this is what I'm going to highlight as we go through the procedure, essentially making decisions on a case-by-case basis and having contact with the public throughout. The first big chunk of the procedure is really the pre-consultation stage. And this is where an opportunity is identified and that the applicant and staff are discussing eligibility and process requirements in terms of what path the bonusing might follow in terms of presenting a complete application, submitting a complete application. The next stage is when we receive a complete application. At this point is when we begin to provide public notice that we've received a complete application, and we would move to a public information meeting. And this is where we would begin to have signals to council and to the public that this matter is under consideration for this type of application. Pardon me, the mouse is misbehaving a little bit. The next big part of the procedure is what we call the technical review, and it has a number of stages. It's important to remember that it's iterative and that refinements would occur throughout this process. The preliminary technical review would look at policy conformity, context analysis, capacity analysis, and provide an initial scan of benefits from the official plan. That would move on to a more advanced type of technical review, and we would also begin to bring the matter forward to a statutory public meeting before council and to receive public input that way. That input would be incorporated back into the discussions and refinements with the applicant, and would continue to evolve. The next stage we're calling more of a corporate review, and we would have some pretty firm firm ideas around what the benefits and what the bonus would be at this stage, and we'd be looking at real estate review, a legal review, finance review, and this is the checks and balances that we have internally to make sure that these matters are tended to properly. We would also begin to prepare a recommendation report to council, and that would follow the usual public process, and that would really be presenting a range of benefits for council's consideration as part of the recommendation report, along with the planning justification and how all the parts are fitting together. Final stage is really a stage that would be delegated to staff in that recommendation report, and that's really to finalize the Section 37 agreement, the details, work out all the implementation parts internally, and then discussion with the applicant. Next steps in terms of this procedure, they will be creating an interest-bearing reserve. So we'll be, the funds that come in through the bonusing procedure will be going to a dedicated fund, and it'll be sorted and kept track of by area so that we can build up these funds and then distribute them over time. We'll also be bringing the final detailed procedure through to council under what's known as the Corporate Policy and Procedure Review, and this will be something that will later be incorporated into our Policy and Procedure Manual and posted on the town's website. Finally, Planning Services will be hosting internal training sessions and communications with other departments and other partners as well. We'll be going out to the development community to share our procedure with them. And so, the recommendation before you in the report is in accordance with council direction to implement the bonusing policies of the Livable Oakville Plan, that the bonusing procedure detailed in report PD 027-12 and the attached Appendix A, dated May 15, 2012, from the Planning Services Department be received. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger, for a very important and educational review of bonusing. I think it's very important for the public to have that and to see how we're progressing and controlling growth for the benefit of the public here. And I would ask if there are any questions of Mr. Bigger. Councillor Adams, Councillor Elgar.
Could you flip back to your second slide?
The second slide?
Yes, please.
Certainly. Let me do it this way. Or maybe not. Pardon me. That one.
That's it.
All right.
And if you could blow that up for us.
Yes.
There's great level of interest in the public art.
Yeah.
We
What
want
is
to know
that?
who the artist is.
It's generic representation. I'm sorry, the mouse is misbehaving here. I'm trying to get that up for you. There we go. So,
in all seriousness,
yes,
there is interest in the matter. Any funds that come to be and are to be exchanged for public art, how does that happen, or how might that happen? What procedure is envisioned?
Well, this procedure really deals with bringing in, securing benefits in exchange for the bonus development and establishing funds. And the purpose of the benefit, or the types of benefits that might be secured for certain areas, are identified in the Livable Oakville Plan in a general way, but also in a more specific way for certain growth areas. And so there's a list of public benefits that have been identified through a community process by staff and in discussion with council, and those are set out in a list. The list is not exclusive, so it could include other things. Public art appears on all the lists, and part of the technical review process would involve a discussion at the staff level about how these identified public benefits are measuring up in terms of the evolution of the town, and what priorities might have emerged since, and what might have taken a higher priority. So that's sort of as far as the procedure would take it. And then with respect to public art, I think we do have a process through, so I'll let council, or Ms. Childs answer.
There's a lot of promoting going on tonight. We'll look to Ms. Childs for a reminder about our public art procedure.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Adams. We do have, through the cultural plan, We do actually have a committee that's struck that will be used to determine the appropriate public art that we would receive.
And so the bigger question of how does the bonusing fund get divvied up, that's split up between, in this particular slide, you've listed off a bunch of them. There are others that could be chosen. That choice is something that happens early on, though.
Through
and if you
your
could
worship.
remind us about how that happens.
Yes, actually, some of the districts or the growth areas have their own specific list of the type of the benefit we are looking for, and that would happen early in the process. That's we would get EMT and SMT involved to see, and then we'd try to prioritize the benefits and what would be appropriate.
And those come through council for each one?
Yes, they do.
Thank you. That's where I was trying to get to.
Okay, Councillor Ogre.
Mr. Bigger, thank you for your presentation, and I do realize we're only receiving the report. And it sounds really good, except if you happen to live very close to where somebody is trying to build something really high, it's a bit fearful that all of a sudden, throw a little more money at it and you can get what you want. I think it's for the public good, but my concern is what might be good overall for the public may not be good for the residents in the area. How are we going to control that? When I look at the list on page 269, I'm not so sure the public that live around each one of these applications were happy with the result that we got. And what I really want to do is, if we're going to do this, can we do the big jobs first before we bring in the small units? I know we've done it, but I'm just saying it's not all roses for the residents.
So the Livable Oakville plan establishes the locations where bonusing could be considered. There's been a fair amount of public input and technical work and planning work that's gone into identifying those specific locations and the amount that could be provided in bonus development. So that is out there, and that's had lots of input. And then we have this process for ensuring that the development that does occur is appropriate, and that the benefit to mitigate that bonus development is appropriate as well. I agree that a number of those examples listed in the report were achieved through settlement, and those often involve negotiation, and not everyone is happy at the table. This procedure should help to iron out that in terms of setting the expectations early and dealing with the issues as they come along.
Okay, further to that, and thank you for your answers. For North Oakville, where a person goes in and they're buying a detached house, will they be told that in the area behind them it is subject to bonusing, and in fact the number of stories of the building could go up a certain number? Will that be in the sales office for the people purchasing? If in fact that would be an area where it could happen? Because that's my concern, is that people go in with eyes wide open.
Councillor, in North Oakville above Dundas, is that where you're referring?
Yeah, along Trafalgar would be a good example.
Yeah, those were the rules of the rules of engagement north of Dundas were firmly and well established quite a number of years ago, if you'll recall.
There will be no bonusing up there?
That's not what Mr. Bigger said. Mr.
My
Bigger,
question was, will the people that are buying houses know when they buy that there could be bonusing in the area?
Well, Mr. Bigger, would you go to the next slide in your deck here? And let's just, now this would be south of Dundas. And now maybe for the councillor's benefit, you could describe any difference between this and above Dundas.
So the policies in the Trafalgar Urban Core that's the only land use designation that is identified as being eligible for bonusing in the lands north of Dundas. And I believe the height is up to 30 stories in the Trafalgar Urban Core. So that's part of the secondary plan. It's part of the official plan for those lands. And so that's something, again, that not every purchaser is aware of, but it is information that's available. And so that, compared to this picture, it would be a significant order of magnitude greater than this. But that is that is the type of development that's anticipated in that area.
And I appreciate what you said, that, like, the purchaser of the house, though, may not know that in fact it could be that much higher. Like, I'm trying what we can do to forewarn people that are purchasing, how we can do that going forward.
Commissioner Clohessy has a comment there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that was the part of the communication package that we have put through on each one of the North Oakville applications. So there's a brochure that's produced for each one of the purchasers, as well as there's information made available within the sales trailer. And on an ongoing basis, we're improving that information that's going out. When we get closer over to the Trafalgar Urban Core, those are some of the considerations that we'll have to give to it. But there is a whole communications push out to purchasers in North Oakville so that they're aware of the community that they're buying into.
I thank you for that, because that's always the issue where they, after they move in, they find out, and I want to do it up front so that in the sales trailer that they're made aware of that. Thank you.
Council, I just ask you to remember that bonusing is a agreement matter, and it's not as of right, and so ultimately the decision comes back to us, even above Dundas, right, Commissioner? And is there any difference in the description on the slide before us for below Dundas with the practical way it unfolds? No, back again. Thank you. Any difference between this and what would go on in North Oakville above Dundas? Either one of you then.
In terms of process or in terms of end result?
There's three undertakings offered on the screen here, reassurances on the screen. Are they valid above Dundas?
Absolutely.
All right, so Councillor, I think you've got as much reassurance as you could possibly get. All right, thank you. I will look for a motion. Councillor Grant, thank you. Councillor Grant moves the staff recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It does carry. Council, would you, how do you want to deal with your advisory committee minutes? Councillor Johnston. Councillor Johnston moves the advisory committee minutes, and you've looked at the addendum as well, correct?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this gentleman wants to.
All right. Is there any member of the public here with information for council on the Heritage Committee minutes? Seeing none, I'll put the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The minutes are adopted. We need a motion to go into a session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving advice subject to solicitor-client. Let me read it for the record. It's important to have this in the record. That this committee resolve into a closed meeting session for the purpose, into a session closed to the public for the purpose of dealing with a matter pertaining to litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality with respect to item C2 and C1. Do I have a motion? Councillor Elgar, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries, and we will now rig the chamber for a meeting closed to the public. All right, we now resume our public session, having been in a meeting session closed to the public for the purpose of receiving solicitor-client advice in the matter of litigation or potential litigation. And while in that session, Council gave direction to staff that the Town of Oakville seek party status in the appeals to the Ontario Municipal Board of ROPA 38 and ROPA 39. And the Chair now recognizes Councillor Giddings for a motion on item C2. And you can read the recommendation, or I will, but you can move it.
I'd like to move that the staff be authorized to proceed in the appeal as detailed in C2.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. And now, according to my agenda, we need a motion to rise and report.
You actually read the whole report if you want. Yes.
And there must be one here. So, Councillor DeMoss, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, and 3, confidential consent item C1, public hearing item 4, discussion items 5, 6, 7, and 8, Confidential discussion, item C2. And advisory committee minutes, item 9, is noted by the clerk. I need a mover and seconder for this report. Councillor Johnston, Councillor Robinson, thank you. Councillor Knoll? All those in favor, please raise your hands. Any those against? The report is adopted. Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? I'm looking hard. I can't see anybody. Yes? No? Okay, I don't want to leave it too hastily. All right, in that case, can we have mover and seconder for consideration of the bylaws? Councillor Johnston, Councillor Elgar. This is authority for bylaw 2012-44, 51, 57, 58, and 59. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? The bylaws are adopted. That completes our agenda. Tonight, I think we've really made progress on our promise to control growth, as we've seen in a number of decisions. I want to say it's been very good working with you, as always, and thank you very much for your time and attention. We are adjourned.